You're listening to Seminary Dropout, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. In cooperation with missioalliance.org, straight from my house in Austin, Texas to yours, interviews with leading Christian authors, leaders, and thinkers, because good theology should be for everyone. This is Seminary Dropout. Let's go! Hey friends, it's me, your host, Shane Blackshear. I wanted to interject just before this episode. This is part 2 of a 2-part episode of my conversation with Dennis Edwards. I've never done this before, and the reason I did this time was, one, because it was going pretty long, but two, there were two obvious sections of the interview. The first part, which was last week's, we talked a lot about race and Dennis's experience in being in white evangelical spaces. And then for the second half, we talked about his commentary on 1 Peter. And we also touched on race on this one, but it was really, the focus was his commentary. And I thought both were so important that I wanted to keep them both, and wanted to them to both seem fresh. So I didn't want people to get tired and tune out for the second half. So check that out. The one more note that I'll add is that at about minute 28, which is almost the very end, we have some sound quality issues, and the same thing happened last week, and I paused to let you know about that. Happened again this week. It was interesting where these problems would happen, notably when Dennis would talk about race. And so I'm one of those crazy people that still believes in spiritual warfare, so I don't know if that's what was going on or if it was just a technical issue for the sake of technical issues. But I thought it was very interesting. I tried to, the audio that's impaired is, you can definitely hear it. It's just not as smooth. And I went back and improved that audio as much as I could. Like I said, that's around minute 28. So wanted to let you know about that. So here we go, picking up part 2 of my conversation with Dennis Edwards. Cool. So let's talk about this 1 Peter commentary. A commentary is such a specific form of literature, and commentaries have been being made for a long time. And so when publishers think about publishing a new commentary, they often have to think of a way to do it in a way that it hasn't been done before or in a very long time. If there's already been a super, so they say super academic level commentary, what's the point from the publisher's standpoint in doing another one? And so you always see publishers coming with different angles with commentaries that they want to fill a void that's not been filled before, obviously, for obvious reasons. So this commentary on 1 Peter, like I said, is part of the Story of God Bible commentary. Right. How would you describe that niche that it fills in the world of commentaries?
Yeah, thank you. I think you summarized well the struggle, and there's probably way too many commentaries out there. It's hard to, if I was a pastor who didn't have a doctorate and wasn't hanging in these academic places, I would really struggle to know what commentaries to get. And I still struggle, but I'd struggle even more, to know what kind of commentaries to pick up. So I would go on recommendations. But what the Story of God Bible commentary does, at least in my mind, is that it does try to keep in mind the overarching meta-narrative, so to speak, of what God is doing and has been doing, informing a people and what he's been doing through Israel and then the church. But it also allows each writer, each commentator to take the text, do some good study. So there's good exegesis there, but not overly technical. It's readable for a pastor and, thoughtful lay people, but then also gives ideas of how to live into that text, the section we call Live the Story. So we don't just call it application. It's varied. It's more connection to other scriptures or connections to different aspects of real life, connection to history. So that category of living the story is designed to help us see how this text could have meaning or might have meaning in our context now. So I feel like it's very hands-on. It allows you to know what the text is saying as best we can understand it, and then how it might be speaking still in our time. So that's what I really liked about it.
How does it work when a publisher or editor is trying to figure out who is going to provide the commentary for what books when it's a series? I know that Scott McKnight's one of the general editors, and I know that you two know each other. Did he approach you about writing this?
He did. He approached me some time back and knew my interest. I had done my doctoral work in the Catholic general epistles, mostly focusing on James. So he approached me, and that was an honor. So yeah, that's how it went. And I think he also, from our subsequent conversations, was appreciative of my pastoral experience and thought that my pastoral voice would add to the practicality of the commentary. So that's how that went.
Well, I always think it's so fascinating when you're doing something that is part of a series, that you obviously, like you said, get to use your own voice, but you're also trying to keep the tone of the series, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that difficult?
Well, yes. Partly because we didn't, as a group, meet that much. We met a few times for Scott and Tremper Longman, who's working Old Testament, to talk to us about the big picture, what we were going for. So, in a sense, each commentary is not, explicitly connected to the other, but they have a similar feel, and then I think much of that work then is left to the general editors. My volume was edited by Scott and Dr. Lynn Kohik, and she and Scott gave good feedback. So they are really more responsible for keeping the big picture in mind and helping us all to stay connected. So I didn't feel a pressure that way. I felt a freedom, in fact.
So let's talk about 1 Peter itself.
Sure.
Did you have any sort of specialized study into 1 Peter before this?
Not really. When I was doing my dissertation work, I went to 1 Peter several times because I felt there were some similarities with James, largely because of the diaspora language. That term's rare in the New Testament. James uses it, Peter uses it, so I had spent some time in those two books. But I hadn't written anything on 1 Peter prior to that. It was more just my own reading and reflecting.
One of the big things about 1 Peter, or at least the study of 1 Peter, is the debate about the authorship, and whether the Peter that we know, the disciple of Jesus, was the actual author of that. You break down really well the reasons that some scholars have said it probably was not him, and but then also give some reasons why maybe it wasn't. And I wasn't clear where you came down on that, if you're pretty open about that, or if you feel like if you lean one way or the other.
No, I think Peter wrote 1 Peter, the apostle that we know of from the Gospels. So yeah, maybe I wasn't that clear, but I was sorry. But I did want to make the case, make a case for it after dealing with the objections. So I think I dealt with the objections first. But I mean, I know that's not a shared view among all scholars for sure. And part of the complaint, or the skepticism, I guess I would say, is how well written it is in many ways, and one wonders, is this Galilean fisherman able to write such a thoughtful document? And there have been scholars who've answered that directly. I think I don't try to reproduce or recreate the work of other scholars. So I just try to point some people to some good work when it came to those kinds of questions, because as I said, it wasn't a really technical commentary. but I don't see any reason not to accept that Peter wrote it. I think it fits the worldview, and even some of the references seem to be from someone from Peter. It would reflect someone whose life we think we know and can sketch out. So I make reference to a book called The Life and Witness of Peter by Helyer, Helyer. It's an IV book. And he does a more detailed job in this area and connects the dots between the historic Peter that we read in the Gospels and then the author Peter, and then some traditions associated with him outside of canonical texts. So I would recommend that.
The other thing about First Peter is that Peter says that he's writing from Babylon. And that's kind of anachronistic. I mean, Babylon as a real major city, I think hadn't existed for, like hundreds of years at that point.
That's right.
A while.
That's right. It's interesting because, well, a couple of things. One is Calvin, interestingly enough, took it to be the literal Babylon, which seems odd.
There's some political reasons for that, it sounds like.
But that's right. And but generally speaking, I think it's fair to say Christians in the first century were seeing in Rome parallels with Babylon. Babylon kind of stood as a metaphor for empire and oppression, and so we see that in the Book of Revelation clearly, more clearly. And so for Peter to say that at the end, greetings from Babylon. It seems that he's in Rome and just uses what Christians would have understood as a shorthand for Rome.
The letter was also written to, it seems, Christians who were Gentiles and Jewish people. The common audience seems to be Christians who are essentially aliens in a foreign land. Is that right?
Yeah, a couple things about that. I mean, there's been some thought that maybe it was more Jewish than Gentile. I think the leaning by most scholars is more Gentile than Jewish. They would see Jews in that part of the empire probably there because of some exile, so they might have been even literally in the diaspora. And then there's heavily Jewish, or maybe I should say it this way, strong Old Testament language throughout the whole book. I mean, many references. And so one could say, oh, he's speaking predominantly to the Jewish people. But it seems like what he's doing is including these Gentiles into the larger story of what God is doing. So by calling them royal priesthood, holy nation, people set apart, and borrowing that Exodus language, it's speaking to this Gentile community that you're part of what God's doing in the world too. So I tend to agree that there was a largely Gentile population that had come to know Jesus. We don't know when exactly the evangelism took place, but when Peter's writing to them, I would argue it's largely Gentile folks who are connected to Jewish converts in that part of the empire. So yeah, I would see that. I forgot the second part of your question. Oh, about diaspora. So I think that when he refers to them as aliens and strangers, it's not necessarily having to reflect the literal sense that people being pushed away and become diaspora. But I do think there was some element of that. I do think there was a legacy of people who have been displaced because of Rome's imperialism. But I think Peter nuances a bit more to say, because of your faith, socially speaking, you are on the margins. You are outside of the mainstream. You are people who are displaced because you don't fit into the broader society.
It's so fascinating that Peter seems to be saying, and this is what you were saying and alluding to earlier, that, okay, you Gentiles, not only are you grafted in from this point on, but you're actually like grafted on to the history as well. Like the past is also yours, the Jewish story and exile, and that's where all those kind of Old Testament references come from.
Yeah.
And two, it really speaks to Peter's identity in Jesus. And I think Paul does this too, because I think that there would be a real strong temptation to say, okay, yeah, you Gentiles are technically in here, but like really I'm the first choice chosen people, and to, you didn't experience this past that my people experienced, but to really say, no, you're grafted in, and that means that this history is your history as well.
Yeah, as you said, like that could be even teased out a bit more. I do think that's what's happening. It could be teased out a bit more because I don't think we Christians today can't even have any thoughts like that. I mean, I wouldn't see, the larger dominant culture wanting to share in the history and of people who have been marginalized. But I think you're right. I mean, I think what you're saying is in the story, well, to take the title of the commentary, the story of God, what God is doing in the world, I think you're right that Peter is saying your story, you Gentile converts, is part of our story as Jewish people who've had this long history with the God of the universe. And so it builds, it can build a sense of solidarity between these groups, a sense of unity. And I think that that's embedded in the letter as well.
It seems like the entire letter could almost be, and this is an oversimplification, and I know that, but the entire letter could boil down to Peter saying, I know that it's hard. I know that you're facing persecution, and I know it's tempting to give in, but remember who you are, remember whose you are, and remember that this isn't forever. And go ahead.
I think that's a great summary, actually. I wish I had thought to say it like that. No, seriously, I think that's exactly right. And, we can, and what we do in the commentaries, of course, you try to deal with the particular phrases, particular things, but overall, that's it. And but I think the reason why I feel the letter has been often ignored, I mean, we focus a lot on Paul's stuff, is that I don't think Christians in America could easily relate to that marginalized status. I don't think they could easily relate to what does it mean to be suffering for your faith. So it was hard to find points of resonance. We isolated a few verses like chapter 3, where you always give a reason for the hope that's in you, and we took that as our apologetics verse. So we all have to be ready to argue with people who don't agree with us. I mean, that's the way I've heard it in much of my life.
Sure.
But the idea that you are this community that's out of sync with the rest of the world, I don't think American Christians think that. I think they're the ones that, I think they view themselves as we set the tone for this country and for the rest of the world, and don't see themselves as out of sync with it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's so important, because what I was thinking as I was reading the commentary was, if you're the average American reading First Peter's words, I mean, if you're a teenager sitting in your evangelical church and reading this, and it's talking about not giving in and staying strong, you're applying that, saying, okay, don't do drugs, don't look at porn, don't sin, stay strong. And I think there's validity in that. But what Peter was talking about was, you are facing persecutions just for being a Christian, just for doing what a Christian does. Like, people are hating you for that and making your life harder. And I know that it could all go away if you just recant, but stay strong.
Yeah.
And it's something very different from what we read into that as Americans today.
Yeah, I generally agree with you. I mean, there's one place where he does start to contrast behaviors, that we might find resonating with that kind of Christianity that you talked about, the way we try to manage the sin of our young people in church. I think that Peter does a little bit of that in chapter 4, where he says something like, you've spent enough time doing what other people do, and he mentions things like uh, drinking parties and orgies and things like that.
Sure.
That the Gentiles, Romans around them. So he said they think it's strange you don't join in to these activities. So it is true that part of their being ostracized is because they don't join in with the decadent behavior of Rome. So that's, maybe that's one quantifiable place. But the other part is that they simply don't believe like the rest of the society with its pagan beliefs, many gods, and all, go down the list. But I think you're right. So it's just by identifying with Christ that brings the problems. And then there are actions that, he says early on in the book, be holy for I'm holy. So their actions that line up with their devotion to Christ also contribute to their marginalization.
Absolutely. And I think that those things, to your point, those things are not always separated, that the actions and the orthopraxy and the orthodoxy.
Yeah.
But I think what I was trying to get at was often we think that these things that we're supposed to stay strong for, that Peter is talking about, to hold fast to, are things that would also make us good Americans. And I think what Peter is saying is these things are not going to make you good citizens of Rome. They're going to make you enemies of Rome. And so in the same way, I think we often miss that when we read it as Americans, that this is not a guide to make us good American citizens. This is a guide to make us disciples of Jesus.
Well, that's well said, Shane. I've been reflecting on that. I'm actually going to present a paper on citizenship at the Society of Biblical Literature coming up. Working through some things in First Peter. It's interesting. In Philippians 1, Paul talks about citizenship, and then he repeats a rare word, a cognate, in chapter 3. We know that verse 3:20. Your citizenship is in heaven. And this notion of citizenship is something that's in the New Testament, but Paul would have us think we're citizens of God's, of heaven, let's say, and and that might put us in tension with the polis that we're part of, the city we're part of. And I would agree with you. I think Peter is saying the same thing, that it's not what makes to be a good citizen of Rome, but as a citizen of God's kingdom, if you will. There's a contrast there, and I think you said that well. And so here we are, right, in 21st century, but we want people to conform to some national citizenship standards at times, and sometimes that gets conflated with Christian behavior. I know it's complicated, but I think you hit it. And sometimes in the church, it's just easier for us to look at the outside of how people are acting and say, oh, that's Christian, because it lines up with the way our society is. Yeah.
You bring out very well the similarities to the way the people of God are being treated and marginalized with the way that today people of color are being marginalized and made to feel like aliens in a foreign land as well. Yeah.
Thanks for noticing that. I really tried to use examples that bring that out, and in my own African American context, I see a lot of parallels. We as diaspora people, we as people who survived through suffering, and in many cases it was Christian faith that took us through suffering. So I do see some strong parallels, and then I would even press to say some of the changes that we were able to get in society came at least largely through the nonviolent resistance to the dominant culture's laws that prompted some of the legislative changes. So I do see some strong parallels there. And in fact, I would argue that if we pay attention to the community that Peter's writing to, a marginalized community, that sets a paradigm for us to say, you know what, it's marginalized voices that we had said earlier in our conversation that often get muted, but they may be the very ones that that communicate best what kingdom values are and what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus, because he himself was on the margins. So I do think that that's a powerful point that comes through, and I'm glad you saw that in the commentary.
Well, the thing that I was thinking when I was reading that was that is one of the reasons why we need more people of color in Christian academia that write these sort of commentaries, and just other, Christian literature in general, but especially on the more academic level, because, I think a white guy could write a commentary on 1 Peter and point out that the persecution of the people of God looks a little bit like the persecution and oppression that people of color feel today, but it wouldn't be as robust as it was coming from you, someone who's had that lived experience. And I just think about all of the robust theology and discussion that we're missing out on because we don't let people of color speak in these arenas as much as we should.
Well, you're not going to get any argument from me. I agree with you on that. And I will even add some that it was really, really hard for us to get our voices not only heard, but even to get the kind of education that would be received by white folks, really. I mean, when I passed my oral defense for my doctorate, this is many years ago now, the early 2000s, the dean walked in and said, he congratulated me and said I was the first, African-American graduate to get get a doctorate in biblical studies from that school, which is the Catholic University of America in D.C. And, it was 2003, I think. And I thought to myself, that's
crazy.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's an honor on the one hand, but it's like really sad on the other hand. But it's not an uncommon story. But when I started, the problem is, it took me a long time to finish because I wasn't one of those people who got a lot of money and could go to Europe and knock it out in 3 years or something. It took me a long time. And when I started, there was a real handful of African-American biblical scholars in the whole country. I mean, almost literally a handful, like 5, 10 people. And now there's a whole bunch, in the last 20 years. But the point is, of course, people didn't read. And then for an evangelical, they won't read something unless it lines up with every single thing that they think that person should believe before they even read it. So I don't know why they would read a book. I mean, it's not as if they want their ideas to be enhanced. They already know their ideas before they go to open a book. So I've noticed that the white evangelical community had a hard time receiving from people of color and women. And I would add really very strongly that we missed our sisters' voices for many years, who see the world in a way that perhaps men scholars didn't see, or maybe did see and enhance that vision, but we just missed it. So I'm all for hearing the voices, but you're right. We need more books written by people who don't just reflect the same European white-centered kind of theology that we've had. Not to say they're heretics, but to say that there's a nuance, there's a different perspective that will enhance the bigger picture for us.
Well, and from my perspective, as someone who sits down almost on a weekly basis and interviews Christian leaders and authors, I look back at the people of color who've been on the show, and almost, not all, but almost all of them they're here to talk about race. And that's great. That's certainly appropriate. But for every, even take this conversation that we've had, for every question that I asked you about race, we could have been talking about your expertise in 1 Peter. And it's certainly appropriate, again, to have those conversations, but I just think about how many conversations we're missing that can't happen because of the roadblocks that people of color have faced at the educational level and then even at the publishing level as well.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I certainly don't mind talking about race and racial dynamics, and I've been a pastor for a lot of years, and it's an important part of my work. But I could say a lot about the reality that many times when we are invited to speak in places, no matter what our degrees are in, we're asked to talk about race. And we're often asked to talk about it in a way to make white people feel less guilty.
Sure.
And something as if it's our job to manage people's feelings for however they're going to receive a talk. Or we have to be somehow experts in sociology and stuff, and I'm not a sociologist. So you're right about that. But I don't want to say it's inappropriate ever. I just want to say that we also have other things to add to the conversation. So you're right. I would say amen to what you shared.
Well, Dennis, I've wanted to talk with you for a very long time, and I'm so glad that you spent this time on the show. I've just really, really enjoyed our conversation, and you have an open invite to come back here anytime you want.
Well, hey, Shane, it's been an honor, man. I'm grateful. You asked great questions. I'm appreciative of the fact that you interacted with the book already. Yeah, so God bless you in your work, and I hope we can talk again sometime.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Remember, you can find all the show notes for this show and all shows at shaneblackshear.com. Oh, and hey, have you ever thought about starting your very own podcast? I bet you have. And I think you should do it. In fact, I've created a course just for you to teach you everything that I've learned over the last couple of years producing Seminary Dropout. So if you're interested in podcasting and want to learn how, go check out my course. You can go there by typing in podcastingforeveryone.org. And you can get a special discount by typing in the discount code Seminary Dropout, all one word. That'll give you 25% off. So go check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Thanks to those that left ratings and reviews on iTunes this week. Remember, that keeps the show front and center. Also, remember, you can find me on Twitter at beardonabike. That's at beardonabike. Also, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/ShaneBlackshear123. And remember that Seminary Dropout is listener supported. You can visit supportseminarydropout.com and press Become a Patron. Remember, this music you're listening to right now is by D.L. Rossi. You can find him online on iTunes and at dlrossi.com. All right, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Love you. Take care.